for me to start. So we are today talking about online teacher education.
Thank you, Farida. It's a pleasure to be here. Farida and I actually came across at the last conference we attended together, which was the AEC, which is the American Education Communications and Technology Conference last October. So it's just a few months ago since we met, and the main point of the discussion today is really to talk about and have a conversation about what it takes to teach online effectively. And we're looking at roles and competencies that are evolving for online teachers, and maybe even making the distinction and similarity between what is similar and what is different from face-to-face and online teaching, but also what makes online teaching effective. So we're just going to have a conversation about that. A little bit about myself. I am currently an instructional designer at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. I moved to the United States 4 years ago, and I've been about 2 years as an instructional designer, and I'm also doing my doctorate in education leadership. My research areas include online teaching, online competencies, and learning design, particularly how faculty can improve their course design using visualization techniques. So that's my dissertation that I'm currently working on. I collaborate with a lot of faculty on campus and outside of campus in other universities, and we research online teachers and instructional design competencies because they kind of go hand in hand. Instructional designers tend to help faculty a lot more in higher education institutions, so we're looking at both of this more discreetly. I'm actually an Indian by ethnicity. I've moved from the Philippines, where I was born and raised and went to school. Before moving here, I used to be an assistant professor in instructional design and technology in the College of Computer Studies at De La Salle University, Manila. And I taught for 8 years in the undergraduate level. I have a master's in computer applications, major in instructional systems technology. My undergrad is computer science, major in instructional systems technology. It's quite interesting, no? When before I moved here, my entry point into the instructional technology field actually came from the computer science house or domain, not necessarily the education domain, but my program, both in the undergrad and master's, has a minor in communications and a minor in education. So you have a very interdisciplinary nature, and that gives me a strength to see different fields and how they come together.
Right. Kiran, I think one of the things that you will see about the community that you're engaging with at this point in time is that we are interdisciplinary, and we're all from all over the world as well. We are a very cosmopolitan group, so you're talking to a group of people who can connect with you in so many different ways. Now, in terms of today's discussion, I think one of the things that you shared was this incredible statistics of 2,500 colleges surveyed by Allen and Seaman, and about 20% of those colleges surveyed said that they have no online teacher education program whatsoever to support their own teachers. And so in a sense, I thought that's really challenging, because we have about 6.1 or so million students taking online classes.
That's right.
And in my own institution here at IU, about 30% of our graduate program are online. And so to see that, that there's that online teacher education programming or support is struggling, is a cause of concern. And so in that regard, I think as we start discussing your work, one of the things that people often talk about is that we don't need any support, because online teaching is just about getting to know a technology tool. There's nothing more to it. Now, hopefully your discussion today and of research will show us something, will add to that. So having that as a preface, could you share a little bit give us a brief overview of your research, and we can dive straight into the discussion.
Sure. So I completely see this trend as well. Just like what you shared, there's a growing number of online offerings in the United States. And it's also a global trend. It's not just in the United States. There's every country is trying really hard to kind of go into this online bandwagon. Um, and as this happens, there is obviously the need for more faculty to teach online. And teaching online and teaching in the classroom, while it seems, oh, it's just the same thing, is it really the same? Is it really the same? My opinion is there are core skill sets that a teacher has, like assessment, design, planning. These are similar teaching skill sets, but when you teach online, the tendency is you need to remaster this, or relearn how to do this for a different modality that is often quite abstract and unknown, and we didn't come from that. We didn't learn from that modality when we were in our undergrad or in our graduate school years. So the competencies of teaching will be almost the same, but the nuances of how this is effective require some remastery and relearning. And then, if that is the point, then it's almost like you need to refit yourself as a teacher to be situated for this modality. So the research we did was, I didn't do this research alone, just so that everybody is quite aware. I'm with a team who did this research, and we looked at award-winning faculty who have taught online, which means they have been doing this for many years. And we looked at when we say award-winning, these are faculty who have been teaching online and have won awards from two major organizations. First, it's the AECT organization, which awards the Crystal Awards. And then the second organization is the Online Learning Consortium, which awards another set of online teaching expertise awards. So these two organizations are quite prominent and or premier in the field. And we went on search.
Go on. Can I interrupt? Because we have this discussion here at our university, which is, what are they being awarded for? Are they being awarded for their technical skills, or for their teaching, or for their facilitation? I mean, what is it that they're being, what did they win the award for?
So typically, when somebody submits for an award application, they would submit pieces, and every organization will require you to talk about your course, the course design. They submit their course shell, and they submit student feedback or student results. So it's almost like you're giving them, I built this course, I thought of it this way, this is what the student said, and this is why I think it works. So it's almost the end-to-end process of coming up with the course, facilitating the course, and evaluating the course. So the course is submitted as a package to these organizations.
And you'll be talking about that more in your research as to the components of the course. And so in terms of your research, you interviewed 8 individuals, 8 award-winning individuals.
Yep. We looked at 8 faculty. We initially had 15, and we sent out invitations, and only 8 responded. And many of them were very interested to talk about this, even if this course is something they have already taught in the past, and they've already moved on to other roles. Like some of them are directors of teaching and learning centers. We interviewed 8, we got the results, we did analysis through qualitative analysis, and then we synthesize and look for themes. Primarily, our 2 questions were, what roles do you play in the online space, and what competencies do you need in the online space? We focused on these 2 major tenets, and when we heard the responses, we almost saw that there were some overlaps, but there were some distinct traits that were highlighted. So I'm going to talk about this more in detail over the next hour.
Okay. All right. So roles and competencies, teaching roles and teaching competencies. And what do you mean by that in terms of online teaching? Based on the research.
If you Google the word competency, you'll see so many definitions. It's basically, a combination of skill sets. You have knowledge and attitudes and skills that everybody should know to do a particular job. But my unique take on a competency is it's not enough that you have the knowledge and skill and attitude, but you have the fit. No, it's the fitness for a job, which means you may have the skills, but you may not be fit. That means you're not entirely competent to do this role. So I'm thinking of it as there's sort of a minimum required competencies to do a certain job role, and I look at it as fit. And to be fit, just like going to the gym, you know, there requires some exercising, some practice, some trial and error, some
Mhm.
experimentation to determine what fits you. And what fits you as an online teacher is not something you will know instantly. And these experts, these award-winning experts, have found out what fits them, right? Because they have done this over and over again. And that's what made this research so exciting, because we're hearing from what worked for them. It's not
Mhm.
something that came from the literature or what they have read. It's from their experience that has been tried and tested.
So what are your findings? So your findings, you know, first and foremost, you used the framework, the Alvarez, and you used the TAC framework, and we can revisit those again in a few minutes. But briefly, give us a good sense of what are your findings? What are the roles that are unique to online teachers, and what are
Sure.
the competencies that are unique to these award-winning, you know, specialists, experts?
Um, Farida, do you think it might be a good idea to share a slide or two at this
Sure,
point so
sure.
that we can just have a summary on a slide?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. Give me a second. And I think it might be good to have this list for everyone to see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You have
Okay.
a nice slide on the roles and competencies.
Yeah, let's do that. I think I'm going to share.
Okay, it's coming. All right.
Okay.
So, and we see right, here we go.
Do you see the slide with roles?
Right, the
And
results.
is it just, okay, so we found from our research, 5 major roles were mentioned by these 8 faculty. They are actually, some of them are familiar to us, some of them are new. Facilitator, course designer, subject matter expert, course management, and mentor. I can talk about these individually just so that we get a sense what these mean. Let's start with the first one. One of the major things for an online instructor is to be a facilitator. You know, we have probably read this over and over and over again, regardless whether it was online or face to face, that instruction needs to move to something more student centered, move to something where students become responsible for their learning. We call this student centered learning, but it's even more critical to do this online, where one of the most important things is, you know, the instructor becomes invisible, right? It's this invisibility that we're trying to tackle. And my role as an instructional designer actually is to make sure that the instructor finds a way to rebuild their what we call instructor presence. So one of the most important things for facilitator roles is to build instructor presence. And the goal of instructor presence is to make yourself visible, to make yourself felt, to make it feel like you're there. You're there with the student, even if you're not there physically, you're felt. This is often done in many ways. Like you could have introduction videos. You could actually send out welcome emails and make everybody feel comfortable, which you would do on a first day of class anyway. You know, but it's now making that first day of class sort of informal thing that you do replicated online. Other ways to be a very effective facilitator would be to make sure students have access to you. A lot of instructors use the online virtual office hours where they dedicate time so that they could WebEx or do an online conference or Zoom with their students. I really like that because it makes the faculty accessible, even if the students are not on campus.
Mhm.
I personally have loved the use of personal messaging where instructors would send announcements or individual emails to students because they're facilitating the learning together. And every now and then students need a nudge, students need a push, students needs to know, hey, how are you doing? Those check-ins actually make your role as facilitator very unique for an online environment.
Mhm.
The next is designer. Um, you know, course design is very challenging, and it requires this rethinking of the alignment between what you want the students to learn and the actual learning that takes place. That gap is formalized into defining learning objectives, is formalized into defining activities and strategies and assessment. Um, but really, the essence of course design is thinking what do students need to learn and how are they going to learn this, right? So a lot of this role is critical because the course design is the heart of the online course.
Mhm.
The
So
role of
before
a
you go
subject
on,
matter.
Kiran, before
Mhm.
you go on, Kiran, I think a lot of us are joining you have taught online before, and the first two are roles that we are very familiar with. But
Yeah.
what's different about teaching online? We facilitate face-to-face discussions. We
Mhm.
think about where our students want to go in our course design. But what's so different about teaching online? And let's give you an example. If I teach online course designing, the heavy load of front loading in online course design is so different from face to face. This is what I mean as to the differences. Do you see other differences in terms of just being a facilitator role online versus that face to face, being a course designer online? That has a different quality
Mhm.
from being a course designer face to face. This is what we're trying to get at. What are the critical differences?
I think you make a great point, Farida. I've seen this too in my faculty who I work with here on campus. The tendency is, let me just take what I have in a face-to-face class and put it online and let's
Mhm.
run with that, right? And some of the very unique differences is, yes, front loading. You're planning ahead a lot of things that need to happen for the learner. You're actually explicitly having to write that down. you know I tell my faculty, when you go into class and you explain instructions verbally, a lot of these instructions you almost know in your head subconsciously, and you just explain it. But when the students faces are not there, you tend to not explain or give additional instructions because they're not asking for it. So one of the things I always ask my faculty to do is, tell me what needs to be done, let's record that, and let's write it backwards. Because the tendency is, when you're talking to somebody, you tend to be more intentional how you give instructions. So aside from front loading the plan and preparing all the materials in advance, breaking the materials apart is really writing really good instructions so that students can learn independently. Students can learn on their own. Remember, again, you're no longer there as an instructor. You're not there to answer questions. You're not there in that moment where the student says, I don't get this, can you
Mhm.
elaborate? You're not there. So there's almost a default of having to be very explicit and externalize a lot of the things you do as an instructor that's quite informal. Now,
Mhm.
I always joke, what you do informally is what we will try to formalize, because that's you, that's your personality. So I
Mhm.
always say, if you use humor in class, let's write with humor. If you give like examples and you like comics, let's use that. It cannot be very formal where it's just an assignment after assignment after assignment, particularly for
Right.
course design.
I think what you're also highlighting that's new about online teaching is to have a very clear awareness of teacher presence versus teaching presence.
Yes.
This is Anderson, Archer, and company. And the idea of teaching presence is that you set it up so that students will know what to do, how to engage, right,
Hmm.
in the class, with or without you being there. Essentially, that the separation between teaching presence and teacher presence is something that we have to kind of have a really conscious awareness of in online teaching. Would you say?
Yeah, I think teaching presence is highly manifested in the course structure. What is explicitly shown to students that this is how the course is designed. Normally, we
Mhm.
don't even do this in a face-to-face class. I always tell my faculty, do you ever show your students how this course is designed, what you thought of when you were thinking this? Rarely. We never tell them, hey, this course has 6 modules, okay? In this 6 modules, you're going to be doing these activities, and this is how you're going to be assessed. we assume that they learn this over time as the course progresses. But when you're online and you cannot have that talk time with students, you have to front load this. The word front loading is the exact word. You actually make all these informal conversations you would tend to have explicit. And the score structure is one of the most key elements for a successful online course. The literature says that, practice say that. My faculty have told me, thank you for allowing me to make this course structure very visible. I even asked them to draw it like in a flow chart so that the students can see what's going to be expected in the whole course.
So in that regard, since you have it up here on the screen, how is mentorship different online?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the mentoring role goes beyond course content. The mentoring role often kind of takes two prong. One is mentoring students on how to be successful in an online course, and the other mentoring role is how to get successful professionally, like in your career. So what we found out, and this is one of the most unique competencies we found out, I think this is actually a very much emerging competency. It's not something that's written in most of the literature. It is very recent that we see this role where students are looking out to instructors as advisors, where they ask questions about why is this course useful? What kind of job roles are there for me? Can you connect me to an internship? Can you connect me to somebody who knows this? Can I interview somebody who is in this field? I think the instructor's role being that sort of network person, it's almost like just because you're online, you know everybody, but which is strange, but it is true. That network assumption that when you're online, you're connected, it makes the instructor have this additional sort of persona of, I need to have connections so that I can advise my students. And these connections do not lie in the university. These connections lie outside the university. In reality, this is the case too. But a lot of instructors are subject matter experts in content, but not necessarily practitioners. So, tying back to the subject matter competence, subject matter role. The subject matter role here again is two-pronged too. What the experts are saying is you must be a subject matter expert in your field, but also be an expert to connect others, to make connections in the field where students can connect content to practice, theory to practice, because that's eventually where they're going, especially for undergraduate programs where students are trying to make sense. Why am I learning this?
So connectivity is I think it goes with the theory now, the idea of connectivism, that it's not so much connecting with knowledge, but connecting with different individuals. And that's individuals and or whatever else, both human and non-human, right? So that's your role as a mentor now in terms of online. So Kiran, if you want to move to competency, the slide, that would also be something that we can continue with.
Yeah.
And then, and so we'll have a Q&A session in a few minutes, but if anybody has a question, please post it on chat and we'll try to weave that in the conversation as well. And so you have these competencies, technical skills, the willingness to learn, knowledge of how people learn, content expertise, course design skills, assess student learning. These are great. But again, the main question is, how is this different online? Right?
Sure.
We do this as face-to-face people. We should be doing this, but how is it different, right?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to differentiate is sometimes the question is, what's the difference between competencies and roles? We struggle with that for a long time because I also think, what's the difference between competencies and roles? As a researcher, you have a technical definition, but when you ask people, they cannot tell too, right? So when we had the instructors that we interviewed share what they thought the competencies should be and what they thought the roles should be, we saw overlaps because they were not really concerned about distinguishing them technically. Right? So you will see overlap like course design as a competency and course designer as a role. I mean, that's normal. But I think, so just so everybody is sort of on the same page, I think competencies are what we need to be able to do. The role is what we need to be able to portray that impacts others. Right? So the role is really connected to the audience that we are dealing with. The competency is sort of the individual skill sets that we need to believe, that we need to learn so that we fit into this modality.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most important things that I've seen, at least in the technical skill, is in the online space, we need to be very visual, right? When I say visual, it doesn't mean always pictures and animation and videos. That is part of it. But when I say visual, we're making explicit everything we know into something that can be seen by others. So I always tell my faculty when I work with them, you're building two things, the back end and the front end. Because this is a course that is online. It's technically a website, right? One is the plan, which goes behind all the planning and all the writing of assessments, all the writing of materials. But how is it that students see this? Right? The technical skill is not simply upload the assignment, create an assignment, create a homepage. It goes beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
How are we projecting this package so that students see the course and understand it? It's almost like a web designer where the company has all this information, but the web designer makes it so simple to understand. I think that's a one unique thing that is explicit to an online course. There's almost like a gateway that needs to always be there between the student and the teacher, and this is the course. In a live setting, like a face-to-face setting, there's no gateway that needs to happen. The gateway, it's always an open door because you come into the classroom, that's sort of the gateway. Here, there's always a middleman or a gateway between the student and the course, and this is the shell, which is normally a learning management system or an online setup. I think that's the unique part about technical skills. The second thing I'd like to emphasize is the knowledge of how people learn. The knowledge of how people learn, I think, is my favorite of all, because how people learn is different from how people learn online, right? We forget that it's not just how people learn. If we add the word online, if instructors are learning how to be online instructors, then learners are also learning how to be online learners. And we need to understand how people learn online. It's very different. For example, one of the key things that makes an online learner different from a regular learner is time, right? When they access content, it's not the same as how they access it in the classroom. A classroom is fixed, 3-hour time slots, 1-hour time slots, very routine, very structured. An online situation, students are accountable for their time. Somebody may watch a video for 10 minutes and then leave and come back to it after 2 hours or come back to it after a week. The flexibility changes how people learn. The access changes how people learn. The sort of motivation changes how people learn. The environment. Online, you have dogs and cats and kids and family and friends and Facebook and social media and parallel screens. You don't have that in a classroom. A classroom is quiet. All you have are learners and you're all doing the same thing at the same time, and it's different. It's different. The feeling of sort of this flexible environment where it changes how people learn. So I think the word flexibility is really key in sort of bridging that gap between how people learn and how people learn online. One of the most important things to consider is flexibility. And even as an instructor, you should adopt that flexibility because they are flexible. If we want to meet the learner's needs, they are expecting flexibility. You also need to be flexible.
Yeah, I think the other thing, I mean, I think that we've seen also in terms of the level of reflectivity, the power of reflectivity, I can't even say it, especially if you do asynchronous type of, modes. There, you have that time frame whereby you and the students both can deliberate. But at the same time, you have the synchronous element as well, which enables you to kind of question and challenge as things are happening. But that sort of flexibility sort of is one of those components. It has extended our ability to reflect longer as teachers and students, but at the same time it gives us an immediate access to to information, to check on information, to challenge information immediately as they're being spoken. And so so that's sort of an interesting development that we have to deal with as online teachers. And I think research has shown that, I think that what students post online in asynchronous mediums, the substantiveness is perhaps higher than just when somebody raising their hands in the classroom and say, hey, I like that idea, and then don't go on. But in an online class where there's, whereby you have to elaborate and extend, you have to add more substance and you have to connect. Is that something that your research uncovered as well, or?
We did find, a lot of instructors are looking at the reflection almost translates to feedback, right? For as the students and the instructor goes into the space where they need to work independently and write thoughtfully, and construct almost more, you're right, now construct almost more substance because they're trying to communicate an idea to a group of people they do not see. It it almost it almost plays into the idea that students need to give each other interaction and feedback so that there's something happening in the course. And if you just say, hey, I agree with that, then there's no response expected back. There's no feedback to that. There's really no feedback there. It's just a comment. And in an online situation, that discussion that we expect to be very thoughtful and substantive, cannot just happen magically. I tell you, I've seen discussion forum questions which are answered by yes and no. And when you have a question that's answered by yes and no, then there's no conversation, there's no discussion. Why is it a discussion question? I've seen discussion questions that are, list the 5 important key ideas from the reading, or watch this video, and what were the top 3 things that the person said, right? This sort of enumerative type of interaction that is expected from the student to gauge some kind of comprehension is not a discussion. In my opinion, discussion requires sort of, there has to be input from the learner. It's almost an idea, a concept, something that is synthesized already, not the early part, which is just enumerating. And I was just making this conversation with one of my instructors the other day. I said, is the discussion forum an old or a new tradition? Right? So we say we discuss in the classroom, so we'd like to discuss online. Did we really discuss in the classroom? Right? So I always, then that takes them aback a little bit and say, I'm not sure. So then they start to think. So I really pose this question to the audience too. Do we really discuss in the classroom, or do we just lecture and have a few question and answer? Right? When we say discussion, there was no lecture before that discussion. The discussion is very new to the online space. In my opinion, this is very unique to online. It's not something we have practiced very well in a classroom setting. It is something that is very well practiced, that is very much emerging as an online practice, because in the classroom, the discussion is organic, right? The instructor kind of goes with the flow and sees what's happening. It is synchronous. The discussion online is asynchronous. Discussion forum online is asynchronous. And I think that changes the nature of the interaction. It changes the nature of what needs to be discussed and what should be an assignment, and differentiating between that.
I see there are 3 new questions that have popped up here. And one of the things that I think Sergio was asking is, should the facilitator maintain the discussion or let the students maintain it? I think this is some of the things that are coming up in terms of our discussion. But before we go into that question, what did your online people say? What did your online award teachers say about all these competencies, about maintaining discussions and whatnot? What did they say? What did you find out?
I remember very clearly that when we talked about assessment and activities, the online instructors did not highlight the use of discussions at all. No? They actually highlighted the use of more authentic assessment, like projects, and giving students opportunities to choose their own assignments. I think as we get comfortable in an online space, and I'm actually not surprised they said that, because as we get comfortable as instructors, we don't mind letting go and having students really take part in the the way they select what they want to write about, select what projects they want to work on, select who they want to work with. So there was this a lot more essence on um, how do we design more authentic projects and authentic assignments for students in the online space. And maybe because these are very experienced, they're going beyond what the learning management system provides. The learning management system often sets the minimum, where you have quizzes and discussions and assignments. This is basic. But when we use discussions, quizzes, and assignments literally, then almost first timers tend to do that. But if you become very custom with online learning, the tendency is to merge these into projects. The project may involve a discussion. The project may involve an assignment. The project may involve these, certain testing of smaller level skills, but the goal is to move higher, to engage into higher thinking, which is really moving into project development or product development, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it becomes more authentic now because you're bringing the student closer to what they're expected to do in the real life, which is maybe the job or maybe a certain skill set. So project-based learning, inquiry, research tends to be higher level skill sets, which we all know. So that's what they talked about more. They didn't really talk much about details on discussion.
So
My
what
experience
you're saying, actually, I think what I'm hearing is that you can't just have discussion for discussion's sake. There has, in terms of online, there has to be something that engages people in discussion rather than just throwing it out there. Is that what you're saying? Which actually links to one of the questions that was just posted. Who are these teachers? What are they teaching? What are the areas? I think that was Elena's question. What are they teaching?
The teachers come from a variety of backgrounds. We didn't ask them particularly what they were teaching now because they have taught multiple courses, but many of them come from a variety of backgrounds. Some came from nursing, some came from education technology, some came from the humanities. I don't think we had anybody particular to computer science or math. We only had 8, so we really have a limited set of instructors at this point.
So now one of the things that I saw, which didn't come out here on the competencies, but because of the audience that we have here, one of the things that I saw was the idea that the competencies include English language proficiency. I thought that was really interesting. I think that wasn't in the in one of the models that you use. Now, is that saying that in order for you to be able to engage in this new world of ours of e-teaching, online teaching, and online learning, that you also have to be proficient in English, or at least have an ability to engage in the language to the point whereby you can derive benefits from the engagement? Is that the case? Is that something mentioned? I didn't see this in the competencies, but it came up in the model that you used.
Yeah, the model that Faridah is referring to was just a model we use in our theoretical discussion, our theoretical framework. And true enough, English language competency was part of that. This did not surface in our interview results, actually. Nobody mentioned that there was a special need to speak English to be able to perform any of these competencies or roles. That was not mentioned. So I'll answer the question from my personal observations and my personal interactions with faculty. I think more than English proficiency, there has to be a strong ability to read and write instruction, right? And whether that be in English or whatever language, there has to be a proficiency to write instruction, not just speak instruction. Because as instructors, we tend to communicate verbally in the classroom, and then we do assessment on, outside the classroom. When you teach online, the tendency is you have to make your informal language formalized, externalized, and this requires a lot of writing. Again, I always tell my instructor who works with me, tell me what you would say, let's record it, and we'll write that, and then we'll edit it. because the tendency to be spontaneous and personal in real life is not the same when we write. We write very formal because we are academic and we write like, academic people. So there's a unique skill with having to write very well, in the sense that you're actually narrating instructions to students, almost like a story. I call it's fluff. It's like you write, but you have to give examples in between. You just don't write the concept. Let's write the concept, give examples, elaborate, summarize, and then move to another one. It's a whole different type of instruction than going into class and talking. So I believe, like, if we go back into this question that you were asking, do we need to be proficient in English? I think that the answer to that is we need to be proficient in writing and reading, primarily English or whatever language your instruction is delivered in. There's a lot of online courses being done outside the United States where it's not in English. China, Asia, Europe, Japan, you will see this instruction is done in their own languages. It's not about the language, it's about the proficiency to read and write very well. Speaking, if you're moving to a video level where you're giving students feedback through video or you're doing video-based instruction, then speaking becomes another level of proficiency. My German faculty who works with me, we're developing a course on German translation. She told me, Kiran, when a person doesn't have proficiency in their mother language on reading and writing, it's very hard to move this to learn a new language and be proficient in that too, because the proficiency comes from the mother language. And I said, that's so interesting. It's almost like there's a literacy that is formed. And she told me that the other day, and I'm remembering that now. And I said, that makes complete sense. It's not about English. Of course, if you teach in the United States, English is the medium of instruction. But if you were teaching in a different country, you would use their medium of instruction because the students would be expecting that. I think it's really the writing and responding skills through text, where a lot of the instruction online is really primarily done through text and images rather than through voice. And that changes the way instruction is delivered, the way instruction is understood, the way instruction is comprehended.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that, because when I looked at the model that you used, that you referred to, your theoretical model, and we can show that at the end, the English language proficiency was one of them as the competencies. And I thought, whoa, hang on.
Yeah.
But because are we talking about the English language dominance again that's permeating even pedagogy wherever we are? So, with our audience, with the TESOL audience, that's something that we talk about quite often. I think the other thing I want to bring up also in terms of what you mentioned, and we'll open this up to questions in a minute, is the idea that comparing face-to-face instruction and online instruction in terms of the effectiveness of teachers, that's not a fair comparison, is it? If you say, if you're looking at an online teacher and you're assessing the effectiveness of the online teacher from the perspective of a face-to-face teacher, that's not fair, is it? Because the two mediums have different strengths and different abilities, and are you different in those two mediums? I mean, is that a discussion that you had with your award-winning teachers?
We didn't have that discussion. We didn't have a discussion between comparing online and face-to-face. What comparisons were made were particular to online novice and online expert teachers, because they're coming from an expert framework. And so we asked about, what advice would you give new or novice instructors? So the comparison between face-to-face and online, in my opinion, this is not related to the research. It's apples and oranges, right? And many cases, it may be assumed to be, it's the same skill set, we're just putting it online, right? It's teaching the same course. It's just one is an online section, one is a face-to-face section. It's the same, right? It is really not, right? The online teachers' competency skill sets, and while they are labeled the same, they are teaching, they are designing, they are assessing, they are facilitating. They're doing very different competencies, right? And different tasks and different nuances to that, different management of that. And to be able to look at this as apples and apples, it is not fair. It is actually not even, it should not even be. It
Mhm.
should really not even be, because the expectations from the students are different online as they are in the classroom. Why should the expectations from instructors be the same? Instructors are also performing very different roles online and in the classroom. I have my other research actually is looking at workload of instructors, how instructor workloads differ. A lot of instructors are saying there's a lot more work to teach online. It's very true.
Mhm.
Very true. There's a lot more work to give feedback, a lot more work to prepare. Very true, right? Because it's new. You've never done that before. Workload portrays itself as a lot more. Other things, instructors say, I feel like I don't have an office space. You know, I feel this is different. I don't have any go-to space that to make it my own. I'm losing the sense of identity in a workplace. These are very interesting things that are not in this research, but it's my other research that I'm just doing that still complements online instructors and how they should be successful online, but it's not necessarily looking at the teaching competency, but looking at the factors that influence teaching. And that's, you
Right.
know, that looks at the environment, that looks at administration policy, and even looking at compensation. You know, many
Yeah.
instructors are raising the issue, I'm teaching online, I should have different compensation. A lot
Sure.
of these are new conversations that higher education has not yet grappled with. It is still thinking. Yeah, those are future things. If you
Right.
were interested in
Right.
research, those are
Kiran,
other.
could you put the full screen back of you so that we can open this up for discussion?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can look at you directly. So I think, at this point in time, I'm going to slowly move into opening this up into discussion. But I think before that, you've raised two things that are different. One is that the instructional designer role of online instructors, and the other is the management role as well. And as we're talking right now, you're managing several devices here, several screens. I
Yeah.
am too, and the rest of us are. I mean, that's one part of management, the other parts. But the instructional design component is an element that comes into play as well. And you're now in the lives of people that don't, that don't necessarily include you in the past, which is sort of interesting, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to kind of ask you, to kind of deliberate on that a little bit in terms of management and the instructional design role, because I think those are two new things that stood out in the discussion. The other thing I want to touch base on is that what is the advice of the experienced teachers, online teachers, to the novice online teachers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah. I'll answer the second question first, because
Okay?
I know the answer to that immediately. The most important advice I heard consistently across everyone is never stop learning. That's their highlight. Keep on learning, never stop learning, because the technology is oops, sorry, I clicked the button by mistake. The technology is going to drive a lot of initial changes. Like, the technology affords a lot of new possibilities. So, however, they also say never stop learning is three-pronged. One is learn the technology, because that's always going to be improving. So you can know what is possible for your students and what is possible for you. Next is never stop learning your content. As you become competent in your content, you become confident to deliver. And when you build confidence to deliver, you're comfortable to tweak, you're comfortable to experiment, you're comfortable to move things around because you're confident with this subject matter. So competence is really a requirement before you can be sort of that instructor who can move things around and be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that they're saying is learn instructional design and learning theory. Learn this part which is not part of your content domain. Learn how people learn about how students learn online, learn instructional theory, learn about media, learn about learning theory. What does it mean to be an effective facilitator? What does it mean? What does discussion mean? What does reflection mean? These are language that is spoken in the education space. So
Mhm.
try to overlap a little bit and learn what the instructional technologies and educational technologies are studying. Just you being part of this conference today, this webinar today, is you building that skill set, not learning about the instructional technology education field.
Mhm.
They talked about it in those three sense.
Mhm.
What was the other question again?
Well,
Forgot the other question.
the other question is, you had like two roles, management
Yeah,
and then management and instructional design.
instructional
I
design.
mean, I think before we get into that, when you first started talking about technology driving pedagogy, I got a little bit worried because that's our main discussion, which is pedagogy. Technology doesn't drive instruction.
That's
It's
right.
pedagogy. You can. I mean, that's at least a perspective that I would like to think we educators assume that technology doesn't drive our instruction, but
Yeah.
pedagogy. But the challenge with online teaching is sometimes technology is fronted, and so. But I guess there's something that we need to perhaps unravel a little bit more, right? Because you do say management of technology is one thing, the other is also the design using technology is the other. In those two aspects, technology is front and center.
It is
However,
it is part. It cannot be. It's almost like the intersection is what we should look at,
mhm,
right? There's the technology and pedagogy, then there's technology integration, where we're looking at this. If this was a Venn diagram, we're looking at the intersection, and that's what we need to really understand. And sometimes to understand the intersection, we need to understand both sides really well, right? It's
mhm,
like binary, but we need to learn technology, you need to learn pedagogy, but more than that, we need to learn how to use them together effectively. And the pedagogy cannot be discounted, but the technology also cannot be discounted. But
mhm,
to say that I'm going to just focus on pedagogy, it is it has to be part and parcel, because the pedagogy changes as the technology changes too,
mhm,
and vice versa. I think we always need to look at it in a lens of this Venn diagram, where we're looking at the center, not looking at the parts. Because if we look at the parts, we will lose the center,
mhm,
and lose the sense of that.
mhm. So
I'd like to talk
I
about
have
the.
a question here from I think it's Ramin, and I think he or she is asking. So what is we talk about pedagogy and whatnot and technology integration. So along those lines,
Mhm.
what are examples of out of the box exemplar teaching that these teachers, online teachers, talked about with much joy?
So the one I really remember is really this instructor was trying to gamify their course. Um,
Gamify. Mhm.
gamify their course. At that time when she was trying this, um, she was not sure how to do it yet, but she was willing to take the risk. And I think this was maybe a few years ago when she tried it out, where gamification was not very much researched or established. So she was sort of new. Gamification just started in 2012. So she started to look into this and see how can I increase motivation in my students by adding elements of games like leaderboards, points, adding challenges, adding levels. And she said that she was willing to take the risk and willing to try, because she had taught this course over and over again the same way, and even she was getting bored. She was like, I need to make myself alive again. And she would say, like, she would use these kind of terms, I want to make my course alive again. And that was the reason she was willing to explore this new pedagogy of gamification. That's one example. It's very unique to use gamification in courses. It's not something you can do for every course, and it doesn't work all the time. Um,
So
Others use project
give us a, when you say game, you're almost inviting a question. What do you mean by gamification?
gamification.
Because I heard this discussion at AACT, and
Yeah.
I keep telling them that, my younger son, for instance, he wants to lose all the time because he wants to see the reaction of both the teacher and the software. So he deliberately tries to make a mistake. I thought, well, that's sort of interesting.
That's cute. That's very cute. Actually, gamification, by definition, is the use of game elements in non-game contexts,
Mhm.
like classroom, gym, chores, washing the car. These are non-game context. This is real life context, no? And the premise of this is, how can we make the things we do every day that we dislike or that is challenging easier and more fun and more motivating? And basically, they say, why is it that games work? Because it's fun and motivating. And we use these fun elements and infuse them in these non-fun contexts. I love school. So for me, who said school is not fun? But for most students, school is a challenge and is something that has to be done. Chores have to be done. And when something is forced upon you, it's not always fun. So gamification is using game elements. Game elements, examples of those include points, rewards, levels, challenges, badges, having a scoreboard where everybody can see how everybody's doing. These are some of the examples of game elements. So we infuse those in classroom learning, where
Mhm.
typically these are not seen. You don't know how everybody's doing, right? There's no intentional leveling. Everybody's at the same level. There's no intentional rewards. The rewards are the grades, right? So when you do gamification, you change those structures so that
Mhm.
you can infuse some game elements and make the course feel different. It should feel like a game. My joke is the class becomes the game. Yeah, I've also tried gamification in my own classes, and I always joke, the class is not gamified. The class is the game. They should be playing. So
Somebody
that's
else, there's another question that popped up just now in terms of virtual reality and online teaching. So I think
mm-hmm,
that Yulia or Ramin Yaz was asking, what is virtual reality? I mean, what role does it play in online teaching? Does it have a role? Is it another form of gamification,
mm-hmm,
which is kind of uh, doing all the things that you just said,
yeah,
that is immersing students
yeah.
in a world that's different.
Well, I think virtual reality is just a medium of delivery. It's just an advanced medium of delivery, right? It's like a
Mhm.
video with advanced layers of uh, feeling. You add the touch component. So uh, if you add touch component, there's a stronger sense of immersion, right? If you add more senses to a learning experience, we call that immersive learning. So
Mhm.
immersive learning is just tapping multi-sensory components of an individual and infusing them in learning. So if you think about virtual reality, it's just a medium of really delivering instruction. Again, that's the technology component.
Mhm.
Always need to look at what is the possibility of virtual reality and how can it be used with pedagogy to create effective learning experiences, right?
Mhm.
And this is a new emerging research area that not many are looking at. I've seen examples of this in conferences where they're trying to infuse um, sort of virtual medical labs so that teachers who are online learning to be nurses, learning to be doctors, can now have a sense of practice online, which often is very challenging to do in an
Mhm.
online space. The reason for virtual reality is not because we're going to make it exciting and fun, right? It's because the lab, which is normally medical technology, an emergency room, for example, or a setup, is not accessible to the student. Even in
Mhm.
real life, they have to go to the hospital to practice.
Mhm.
How can we bring the hospital to them? This is not something you can just buy. It's not a book you can order on Amazon, right? It's not accessible. The laboratory component where learning is essential to happen is
Mhm.
not accessible, even in a face-to-face setting. There is
Mhm.
no choice but to practice with a human, what you call dummy, when you learn medicine.
Mhm.
So the challenge of virtual reality is to bring these sort of situations or contexts which put students at risk for access or even danger, like saving somebody from fire. Right? They simulate this, or airplane pilots. A lot of virtual reality has been used as how
Mhm.
can you simulate something that you cannot actually buy and you cannot produce in a university.
Yeah.
So this is the potential of virtual reality, and this is how it should be looked at, not looking at It's just some fancy thing that we want to use because it's there.
Right. It's also increasing the spontaneity of engagement, which is very critical in language learning and language teaching as well.
Yeah.
And the immediacy of experience, the immersive experience. I think the other question that popped up was, I think somebody was asking, to be an online teacher, do you have to have a very good face-to-face, to have had a face-to-face teaching experience? Is that the award-winning teachers that you interviewed, were they face-to-face teachers before?
Absolutely. They all were face-to-face teachers. They have all been teaching for many years. They have been teaching at least 15 years before they went online, because many of them were instructors years ago. I was a face-to-face teacher before I started teaching online as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's advantage and disadvantage to where you started from, and the amount of relearning and remastery that needs to happen. I mentioned this in the beginning. No? When you actually want to teach online, you need to relearn and master the teaching competencies that you know. Sometimes the amount of relearning is a lot more when you've taught online for many years and you're used to a certain way. But there is value in teaching online because you can teaching face-to-face, because you can anticipate student behavior, which is something that you cannot see or feel online, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you go online, you don't see their behavior. You may read their behavior, but you don't feel it. And coming from the classroom, you almost have an assumption built of what the behavior of students are. And you learn that in two ways. One is your experience as a student. You know that, and you also know that from observing students. And really, they're always different. When I started teaching, I think people learn differently from me. I thought I was a good learner. I also see my students and I say, she's a good learner too. So they learn differently, you learn differently, we all learn differently. So we get a sense of that when we are teaching face to face. The behavior
Wow.
aspect.
So you're making a statement there about the fact that to be an online teacher, you need face-to-face teaching experience. Now, I think a lot of questions are going to pop up as a consequence of that, which will be interesting to take on as we proceed.
Yeah.
Elena has another question from Cleveland. She's asking about what are some of the examples of things of what the 8 teachers use in their online classes, that they often talked about as being effective as part of their instruction. For instance, videos,
Sure.
Weekly or modules, or what it is that they've used that they've found beneficial and effective in their instruction. That's Elena's question.
Very common answers I heard was to be able to, many instructors try to maintain the presence, and a lot of these strategies are connected to this concept of presence. So things like welcome emails a week before the classes start, then during the class as it starts, and then a week after, to make sure students are feeling welcome and feeling safe and feeling comfortable. I think that was a very common thing. They would say, I want to make my students feel safe. I want to make my students feel comfortable. I know that it might be their first online class. So sending welcome messages, sending a welcome video, and asking students to introduce themselves on the first week, because they're not able to introduce themselves in face-to-face situations. They were asked to also submit an introduction video or introduction message. I've also seen a lot of instructors who have done this multiple times make use of instructional videos, deliver instruction. My experience working at USC Charlotte with faculty who are teaching the first time online, they're quite scared to create instructional videos because they're not sure how they sound, they're not sure how they look, and they get conscious and they don't look at the camera, and they're so scared. But a more experienced instructor has overcome that fear and almost don't care if they don't look good. Sometimes they say, I teach in my pajamas and it's fine, and I'm not that conscious. Now, many people have different opinions on that, how you should portray yourself in a classroom environment. Should you be in a vest and a jacket, or is it okay to be in pajamas? Your students are in pajamas anyway. So they talk about that, having videos and try very much to make sure that videos are short, just 3-minute videos, 5-minute videos at most. Long videos, they have said students just do not watch. They also make sure that there's a online syllabus. A lot of them talk about making sure the syllabus has a lot more detail than what we normally do. An online syllabus, a lot more instructions, a lot more information about how to get help, where to get help, help with the technology, access to library resources online, access to netiquette resources online, access to accessibility resources online. These are very unique to an online course that is not something we always think about in a classroom, because we can say that the library is there, go to the library. We say that very casually as if it's really very common sense. But for an online learner who has never seen the institution's library, how do they know where the library resources are? So directing them to, this is the library website, this is the librarian for your subject domain. Reach out to them if you need help. This is how you search. Things like that are very unique to the online space.
Yeah, I think that's there's a lot of information there that you've provided. One of them is you mentioned knowing how people learn, the idea of autonomy, the idea of student directed learning. That's becoming a huge component of online teaching, taking advantage of informal learning. That's another huge element of online teaching and learning. There were two other questions that popped up. One is, the idea of mobile learning and how that is a component, whether or not how does it go along with your conceptualization of online teaching? Because mobile learning is a huge. For instance, Natalia and I, whom you see on screen, we're working with teachers in Central America, and we've had to use WhatsApp because nothing else that's available that can allow us to teach. So choose your questions, because we're kind of running out of time. The other is the concept of teaching online and the concept of teaching students from different cultures with diverse backgrounds. That's been a subject of discussion as well. So with the few minutes that we have, what are some of your thoughts on both or either one of the questions?
I'll try to handle both. I think the mobile learning aspect, just so that everybody knows, there are two ways to do mobile learning, right? One is to use the mobile to find content, and one is to use the mobile to move into an experience level. And when we do Google search to find content, when we use apps, we're just accessing content. There's no interaction happening. But when you move the mobile phone aspect to, let's using WhatsApp for learning, you're moving into the communication aspect. So it's almost like there's the facilitation happening, not really the content. So choosing what you think mobile affords for you. Thinking is the mobile device going to be more useful for my students to find content in this course, or should it be more of bringing it to the level of let me communicate with them and build stronger relationships with my students? I think that's two-pronged, and thinking what fits you better. For the second question, teaching online with diverse groups of learners, it's not going to be easy. Teaching face-to-face with diverse groups of learners is not easy either. I remember I'm from the Philippines, and I thought there was a time when a lot of Koreans moved to the Philippines and were learning English primarily because we are an English-speaking country. And I had Koreans, I have normally a homogeneous group. They're all Filipino or Chinese because they're Chinese born in the Philippines. They read all Filipino, and I'm the Indian professor, right? Me, I'm different, but I don't see myself different because I was born there. But these, students who came from Korea had such a challenge assimilating alone. What more talking to me when they could not even barely communicate in English? I remember myself having to draw, things, and having to move to a level where, let me explain to you what technology is through drawing. Because I thought drawing was more universal than language. And we really have to, it doesn't matter what the modality is, classroom or online or video or mobile. I think when we teach diverse learners, we have to meet them at the level where they are and understand what works for them. And it's this concept of being inclusive. It's not about people with special needs, whether it be language needs, disability needs. It's just knowing that everybody needs to be accounted in this, even I have special needs and I don't have a language deficiency or anything, you know.
Mhm.
I like this idea of learning for everybody and inclusive learning, where learning is not primarily for a specific target audience, but it's learning thinking of everyone in mind. If I
Right.
make a video, how can I make it easier for everybody to understand my video, regardless whether they speak English or not?
Mhm.
Everybody would appreciate the organization of a video, the chunking of a video, the length of a video to be 2 to 3 minutes, the simplicity of a video. Everybody appreciates that. Doesn't matter what country you come from or what dialect you speak.
Mhm.
So
I
I
think
think we should adopt the mindset of being inclusive um,
right.
for any form of instruction.
Mhm. I think also, I mean, in addition to that, online learning, there's a culture in and of itself. For instance, I remember, I mean, I've been doing this. I mean, I've always had a blended load at Indiana University, meaning I teach both online, on site, and hybrid, and whatever else that we but I think newcomers, new learners, when they post a long letter, because they get it perfect before they post. And so one of the things that we've had to work with is that if you're trying to learn in this setting, you need to maintain some level of interactivity. So you cannot post a long epistle, but short one so that others can engage and are interested in engaging. So in essence, teaching online, there is a cultural element itself in what you
Mm,
can do online. And I think that's something too, as online instructors, we have to be very cognizant about, because it is a culture in and of itself, and
yeah.
that we have to work with. And so,
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the important things, I think one thing that didn't come up in the research, but I've seen more and more is the concept of modeling. You know, even if a student begins that way, they tend to model what they see.
mhm,
um, and it's the same in face-to-face settings too. They tend to follow the flow, you know.
mhm,
If, oh, that student is doing that, I'll do the same thing. This instructor posted this way, I'll do the same thing.
mhm.
Somebody use emojis, oh, emojis are allowed, I'll use emojis too. Somebody posted a meme, I'll post memes too.
Right.
Somebody posted a video, I'll post videos too. It's modeling, and I really think as instructors, we need to be students too, so we know how to model for students as well. And that's not something that has come up in the research that I had with the 8 instructors, but I think I've learned that more as now because I'm a doctoral student, so I keep on switching between roles. I'm sometimes an instructional designer, I'm sometimes a student, and I'm sometimes an instructor. So when you switch, you tend to look at what's on the other side of the fence, you know, and
Mhm.
then you reflect. And I think modeling really tends to be uh, a good
Essential.
way. It's
Yeah.
a good way to really, you know, help students sort of normalize. We don't want really always in the box, you know, not everybody needs to do exactly what you do, but it could be a baseline setting, at
Sure.
least how we expect students to perform or how we expect students to react.
We have a minute, and so
Yeah.
do you want to, save things? And we've been asking you questions and stuff like
Oh,
that. Are there things that's left unsaid that you feel should be said in terms of online teaching, what you've learned from the research?
sure. Um, I think first I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here and joining the conversation. I think there's much value in listening to what's out there. When I was growing up, when I was new in this field, my mentor who lives in Manila would always tell me, the best way to do this right is to see good examples. And you know, this research is an example of that. We see what experts have been doing. Just, um, coming from that mindset, I think the one thing I'd say is just always be up to date with the three aspects. No, it's be up to date with technology, be up to date with pedagogy, and be up to date with the instructional technology or education technology, which is the integration of the two, this pedagogy, technology, and the intersection.
Mhm.
You have to be up to date. Um, and there are support structures in universities that are now available. Instructional designers, like my role here, are there to help. No, centers for teaching and learning are there to help. There's a lot of online resources available that are there to help. So don't feel like you're not supported. If you need anything, if I can help you in any way, please reach out. My email is probably shared somewhere. Otherwise, I can share it. I can type it on the chat.
Right. Well, we'll put it up on the TESOL, intersections and all those things. I'll share it with you with your permission.
Absolutely.
And then also, I think that's really important to know that your research, we are touching this research, brand new research, it's not yet out in publication, but it will be soon, I think. And you have 2 pieces out, and so we can look forward to that. And so it's 1:16. We're 1 minute over. I just want to thank everybody. Almost over 40 people turned up today during the finals exams week. So that's terrific. So Kiran, we thank you for sharing, crossing domains and coming over to our world and sharing some thoughts with us. We value this input. And to everyone, thank you for joining us. It will be on YouTube. And I'll send this out also to our intersections, and you will have the video link very shortly within the next few days. So thank you, everyone.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.